Hello and welcome to Families Made Differently. This is Bex Baker, your host. I am back with my mum 2 months in a row. You guys are lucky listeners. Can you tell we're spending a lot of Christmas period together? We're actually not.
We're not.
Do you want to just introduce yourself briefly again? If you want a full introduction, go back and listen to December.
Yeah, so I'm Erica Anderson. I raised 4 of my own children. So Rebecca is the eldest. She tells me she's not Rebecca, she's Bex.
You called me Bex first, may I just say?
I'm also called Ouma now, which you would have picked up on the December podcast as well. And if you want to know what it means, you need to go and listen to that podcast.
How did you feel about becoming a grandparent to adopted children?
They are my first grandchildren, so I don't have any other grandchildren to make any comparisons to, which is in some ways quite helpful.
Yeah.
Because becoming a grandparent is probably the most amazing thing that has ever happened to me. And adopted or otherwise, they are mine. And as Jack said in the first podcast, they are my very own. They are beautiful, and I love that I can give them back to their mum and dad when I'm exhausted, but I also love to just be a grandparent. And so it makes no difference to me where they came from, in a sense, because they're mine.
How has adoption shaped your family, or our family?
Yeah, it is our family. Probably in some ways, initially unexpectedly, it's obviously given us a different role because we weren't grandparents before our grandchildren came along. I skip the adopted section whenever I talk about them because as far as I'm concerned, they are my grandchildren. And so they've shaped our family in terms of
Adding
the next generation and just being awesome and amazing. And I mean, we have a family that's all in, aunts and uncles all in. And because we are quite a close-knit family, we do quite a lot of kind of family times together, and they are absolutely adored, and they're adored as nieces and nephews, and they're adored as grandchildren. They also have a great grandmother still, and two great grandmothers and a great grandfather. They've got lots of people around them to absolutely love and adore them.
There were a few more great grandparents originally.
Yeah, they've lost. Toyan's lost. And Lavea lost one, who she never met. But
yeah. She knew her name. What is your favourite memory so far with your adopted grandchildren?
I'm assuming this is in relation to them being adopted rather than just them being my grandchildren.
Yes.
So more focused on the adoptions.
Yes, please.
Okay.
It helps our listeners.
The thing that I probably would say is probably the only main unique thing that we've done with them is the whole celebration, the court celebration. And I had no idea what a court celebration was until we had one with Toyan. And then we had another one fairly recently with Lavea.
So what is a court celebration?
So a court celebration, it's a little bit weird. You go to the court and it's the family court. So you go to this building and
go through security
and you have to be there half an hour before so you can get through security, and you take nothing with you because otherwise all your things get confiscated and whatever.
Yeah, even your flowers and gifts to social workers.
And then you go to a court, and it's basically just a big room with desks in it. They're quite small rooms. It's not like the big courts that you see on the TV or anything. It's kind of it's like a big classroom really. And then there's obviously a section at the front where the judge sits behind, and there is a judge, and he has his robes on with his wig and everything, and he looks a bit posh and intimidating, but just genuinely so sweet and kind.
It is the highlight of their jobs, I think.
Well, it's one of those times that they can actually be really positive within the system. And obviously the one that we did most recently was with our granddaughter, Lavea. And that was just really precious because the judge actually spoke to Toyan and engaged with him. And he asked all sorts of questions. And
Toyan loved it.
He did love it. He did love it.
Yeah.
But at the end he says, and so who are all these people? And he talks about all the other people in the court besides his mum and his dad and his sister. And he turns around and he looks with such pride at everyone else and he goes, my family. And it was just, that probably was the highlight of everything that has ever happened over the 3 years, because there've been lots of dips because of all the roller coastery stuff that you go through in the adoption process. But that was just the most precious thing. At 3, he knew exactly who his family were and could identify with them and had relationship with them. And it was very precious. And it will be something that stays with me forever.
It was really special. It made me tear up over it. Okay, how has God been speaking to you through it?
Well, I mean, I think naturally you automatically realize that I don't think we really grasp the concept of how we are adopted into God's family until you actually experience how adoption works in society. But in reality, it was God's idea. So many of the things that we do in our society were actually God's invention, God's starting point. And it's just lovely to see that being enacted through adoption. So God adopted us, and so you're adopting your children as part of that, showing God's love to them. And it's a choosing. And it's just really, really precious that we are chosen by God to be in his family. And so that's probably the way that I've kind of really had that highlighted for me over the last 3 years, just that real enhancement of understanding of God's adoption of us into his family.
Have you experienced God's blessing?
Well, yeah, being a grandparent's blessing. Blessing on blessing on blessing on blessing. Just having little beings in your life is a blessing. These little people who test you and try you and push you and then turn around and sit on your lap and listen to music or want you to read them stories. All of those are God's blessing because he gave them to us. And it's precious, really, really precious. So yeah, God's blessing is just overwhelming. God's blessing per se is given through the adoption process in this particular case. But at the end of the day, it would be through any child in your life. I don't think that that's unique to adoption. It is just having children in your life is a blessing from God.
And it's just remembering that in some of the hard parts of adoption.
Absolutely. There is blessing.
Still blessing, yeah.
But I think we've learned a lot through the process, you know. We've learned a lot about each other. We've learned a lot about how to, I want to say, be your better self, but that sounds a little bit like a self-help, so that's not what I mean. But in terms of sometimes saying the hard stuff in situations is actually the right thing to do, and sometimes it's not. And so learning the difference is also important. And I think that I've learned so much more about myself through this process. And I'm sure you could probably say the same.
Even though you didn't go through it, you feel like you've learned a lot about yourself.
Yeah. Well, I've become a grandmother.
Well, yes.
You know, I've become Ouma.
Yeah.
I have a new name.
So do I.
And so I think that plays into it definitely.
What advice would you give someone who is becoming a grandparent through adoption?
I can remember having a conversation with Jack fairly early on, knowing that I love Toya, but being really worried about not loving him as much as whoever.
Assuming a birth grandchild was...
than any other grandchild, you know, would there be... But yes, potentially that being an issue, or would, you know, and having a conversation about that.
He's probably always going to be your favorite. He's the worst.
And that's what you think because you're the first.
Yeah. My Nana always told me I was her favorite first grandchild.
Yeah, he'll be my favorite first grandchild, definitely. Yeah. I've lost my train of thought now completely.
Sorry, what advice are you giving?
Advice. My biggest piece of advice would probably be what Jack said, is you will always just love them because you love them. That it doesn't matter. You know, we spoke around it and he was like, no, you'll just love him because you love him. And don't be worrying about what might or might not happen down the line. Because there is a fear that I certainly experienced a fear in not maybe having the capacity to love in a way that I should.
Whatever should looks like.
Whatever should looks like. And I suppose that will be the test in time, is I don't have birth grandchildren yet. And so how is that going to feel and look different? Yeah. And maybe that's a podcast for the future. But just in terms of, I don't know.
Well, there's elements like you get to journey 9 months with one of my siblings.
Yes.
One of my sisters or your daughter-in-law. Or there's that preceding stuff like baby showers and all those things that get to be part of it, and getting to be there potentially at a birth
but certainly around a lot more, because also on top of that, Toya was born in COVID.
Yeah. And we had our 6-week cocooning where you're not supposed to engage with other people.
Now, I mean, with Livea, I was very privileged to be part of her early being with you. That's why I say she always kisses me, because she kisses me at the back of her transition book, doesn't she?
Yes.
Yes, I was the back picture. And she always used to kiss the book goodnight.
And in fairness, you can see your attachment of all the extended family. You can see your attachment is greater, always because of that.
Yeah.
It's
And what's
like
really
deeper.
interesting is, so we don't live locally to each other, but we would speak most days
Especially with Livea.
And it's not a long chat. It's normally just
because I'm like, I need some way to entertain her for 5 minutes so I can just breathe.
I'll get a phone call. But the funny part for me is that if I don't answer, Mummy isn't very popular.
No,
it's
actually
always
the risk.
It's really sweet that's the relationship that we've built up over time. And then you realize that you now have 2 grandchildren and you love them completely differently. And I think that's been really helpful for me.
Oh, good.
Having the second adopted grandchild, because
coming through adoption, but also the fact that I'm now not as worried about how I will love a birth grandchild in comparison, because it'll be different again. Love for someone is involved in the relationship you have with them, and each relationship is different. That's a very long-winded story to advice, but I would say not to be worrying about how you will love them, because you will, but just being all in. Amazing. Is there anything else that's the end of my question. So is there anything else you'd like to share with us, or?
No. Probably though, I have to share.
Oh?
Yeah, I have to share that I have the best grandchildren in the whole world.
That is, you're just saying that so that when they listen to this in like 10 years time, it'll be like, yes. It was only us then, cousins. She wasn't talking about you.
Well, I think that probably that will include all the rest that come along.
I'm sure.
But that's the one thing that a grandparent gets to be, is completely and utterly biased.
Yes, as they should. Well, thank you for joining us.
You're most welcome.
I hope you were as blessed by that chat as I was. As we go into 2025, there are so many exciting things happening on the podcast. Lined up this year, we have the Scotland lead for Home for Good, who will be sitting down with us in the coming months. Many other adopters, an adoptee, a care experienced young person. Currently, we are lacking on the foster care front, so if you are a foster carer or you know a foster carer who might like to share their story, please do get in touch, either on our Instagram page, Families Made Differently, or at familiesmadedifferently@gmail.com, and I will pop that email address into the description of the podcast. So lots lined up, lots to look forward to, and we hope that you join us for the journey. This was Families Made Differently, the podcast designed to share stories from Christians across the UK whose lives and families have been shaped by fostering and adoption.